What a shit show. What a shit show.
Welcome to the Voice San Diego podcast. My name is Scott Lewis. I'm here with my friend Andrew Keatts.
What's up, buddy?
My other friend Sara Libby.
Hello.
Boy, do we got a lot to talk about. This is the shit show.
I think we're supposed to give a warning that if you're listening with your kids, there's going to be some language.
Yeah.
Well,
Which has already happened, so sorry, kids.
It's public hearings now.
That's true. That was stated in open public hearings. So
We're going to get into why that was said in a second. Boy, we've got a lot to talk about. Let's start first. Wanted to tease, in your feed, your podcast feed, is another show. We've been doing this a little bit lately, of course. A special interview we did with Scott Sherman, Councilman Scott Sherman, about all kinds of things. So we talked about the new lease for SDSU football. We talked about the shit show. We talked about them and, what he thought about as far as what San Diego State should have done with this lease. And maybe they should have taken over the entire stadium and then taken the revenue from it. He had a big take on the Supreme Court ruling on the pension reform measure that has thrown the city into a bit of chaos. And on vacation rentals, he explained why he is so passionate that people be allowed to set aside a home for visitors to rent.
The reason I'm so passionate about this one is I'm just a property rights guy. I really believe that property rights is one of the foundational pillars of our Constitution. Without that, we don't have freedom, we don't have liberty. If you don't have those rights in your property, and without government telling you what you can and can't do, within reason, of course.
Within reason, of course.
An important caveat.
of course.
Very Adam Smithian, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Very strong, just capitalism. That's just capitalism, right? Freedom, property, all that. Wanted to also remind you, October 6th needs to be on your calendar. We have some great programming coming together for PolitiFest from 12 to 6:30 p.m., all kinds of debates and probably some sort of live podcast thingy, all kinds of stuff we're pulling together. And so make sure you get on that. You can go to politifest.org to reserve your spot there. All right, let's get into the shit show.
What a shit show.
Okay, so how do we start? How do we even start this? That who was speaking there is Tom Lemon, the leader of a coalition of labor unions called the Building Trades Council, and he was speaking ostensibly in favor of the city council.
Yeah, that sentence as an introduction doesn't really explain what's about to come.
No.
Then he started being like, this is a great plan. Definitely approve it.
Yeah. Total shit show, but great plan.
Definitely, you should put it on the ballot
I
despite
really-
the whole shit show.
Yeah, I really want you to put it on the ballot. All right, so it was the climax, literally the climax of a years-long, probably about a year since the last time they tried to put a convention center measure on the ballot. A year-long drama.
It sort of feels stupid at this point to separate the different convention center gambits into like distinct instances.
I think this is a clear chapter, though.
It's like international football.
Yeah.
It always feels, or soccer, by which I mean that.
Yeah.
The season never ends.
Yeah, there's
It's just a constant season.
All right. Well, this particular chapter, or whatever we want to call it, did begin last year when the mayor tried to get a measure on the ballot that would have increased taxes for an expansion of the convention center and funding of homeless services and roads. That failed. The city council said, try again. Go for the 2018 ballot. So he got rid of his chief of staff. Now, chief of staff quit. Stephen Pitts said it's time to move on, whatever. But he brought in a new chief of staff, Amy Fawcett, and then over time elevated Chris Michelle to the new COO position at the city of San Diego. And their job, their promise, their mandate was to get stuff like this done. Get it done. Get stuff done. And then something happened. There was a special Supreme Court ruling, right?
Well, I guess there had already been one.
Right. But
Yeah.
they
decided that this was that this Supreme Court ruling was a crucial opportunity, an opening.
Right. So the Supreme Court rules that citizens initiatives don't necessarily fall under the part of the California Constitution that governs how you pass taxes. And thus, one part of that is that you need 2/3 of a vote to pass a special tax for things like convention centers. And so they thought, well, let's maybe consider doing it as a citizens initiative.
Right.
Let's point out that that is nowhere near settled law. And
Right.
many people think that the Supreme Court ruling does not say that at all.
Right. Now, I made a case at the beginning. I think it does.
Yeah.
But I'm not,
and you're a lawyer.
Right.
I am not a
well-known
Supreme Court justice.
constitutional lawyer. Scott Lewis.
The the San Francisco city attorney thought it was. And then these guys said, well, we're going to test it out.
So I think they did two things at the onset of this round of the gambit. They made that decision, and they said, we will begin with labor. We're not going down the road of cooking up a plan and trying to get labor on board somewhere along the line and then getting steamrolled by them at the end, which was basically what happened in 2017 when they had this mayor-led initiative, which then the city council refused to schedule a special election, and that was, I think most people believe, strongly influenced by labor's influence.
Right. You were the first to break the news that they were actually convening a broad group of people, right?
Yeah.
A lot of different activists, labor, the visitor industry, the mayor's sort of not on staff representatives, a lot of people like that. You broke the news that they were meeting. You tried to talk to some of them. They're like, they were really keeping it close to their chest about what they were coming up with. Some members of the budding coalition started dropping off.
Yeah, they had tried to pull in these not even just labor groups, but liberal activist community groups, things like PANA, that were going to broaden it even more than. I mean, it's already still what remains of this is a broad coalition, but it even began more broadly than that.
Right. And so they start to build this thing. They're going to be like, all right, we're going to go for a citizens initiative. We're going to get this thing on the ballot. We're going to raise this tax. We're going to put more money into homelessness. That was the mayor's major concession to these more liberal groups. And we're going to work together. Everything is going to be all in unanimous decisions. Nobody's going to have an upper hand.
Yeah.
Right? All right. The mayor said at his State of the City, he said, this initiative will be the most important decision before voters in November, and I will work tirelessly with the coalition to get it passed.
And my pledge to you is that by the time I leave office, thousands of struggling San Diegans will be connected to permanent housing. The number of housing units built in our city will be on the rise. The San Diego Police Department will be fully staffed for the first time in over a decade, and the modernization and expansion of the convention center will be underway.
That was the promise.
That doesn't seem like it's on the horizon.
That was the promise. So springtime comes. They finally get the initiative language together. Remember, there was delay and they weren't sure what was going to say here and there, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Weren't sure exactly how they were going to guarantee labor, a spot, all that stuff.
We'll get more into it, but even at this point, there's already consultants coming and going.
Yeah. There was basically both sides wanted their own consultants.
There was that was this is the type of negotiation that ultimately doesn't matter to most voters. But there was you had these two different large factions in this one coalition, and clearly they were saying, look, we're not just going to do it with all your people and put our name on it. We want our people here too.
And of course, the consultants on both sides think the other are complete
dolts.
Yeah, completely incapable of doing this work, and thus they need more of the business. And there's all these deals being made about who gets later business, who gets those.
We should put a pin in that, if not for this show, a later show. I want to at some point discuss the presumed competency of the consultant class in this town and what this experience tells us about it.
Yes, there's something to be discussed there. Okay, then it becomes clear by about May that things aren't going well with the signature gathering. And they make, and that may be because they made a proactive decision. They said, we're not going to try to compete with all of the other signature gathering initiatives that are going on right now. There's 14 statewide ones, you'll remember, the soda thing, all that stuff. And they said, it's hard to get to the top of a signature gatherer's list when that's going on. You have to pay them more per
premium,
signature. And so how about we just wait? We'll slow roll it a little bit. We'll wait till those get cleared off, and then we'll have a cheaper access.
Keeping in mind here, this is the New York Yankees playing Moneyball. Like, you've got the money.
Yeah.
You of all the people in town to start being stingy about signatures.
Yeah.
Like you had the socialists.
That's a really good point.
Yeah, you had socialists pushing like Costa-Hawkins repeal at the same time, willing to pay the price for a signature, and like Scrooge McDuck doing backstrokes in gold coins, being like, wait until the poor people have paid for their signatures, then we'll come in and get it on the cheap.
Yeah, I mean, it just drives home the fact that it was a strategic decision. It's not that they just couldn't get their act together and gather signatures until a later date. They decided to do that.
Yeah, so they go through that, and there's a lot of people starting to, from, again, when you have a lot of different consultants, things start percolating out, right? And they're like, you might want to check into this. This isn't going so well.
You might famously remember, for instance, us talking about it on the podcast many times.
Yes.
And indicating,
it wasn't a secret.
Yeah,
this was a well-known situation.
Yeah, this was such an undercover situation that we talked about it on this podcast like a half dozen times, laughing riotously about the absurdity of their claim that it wasn't happening.
I'm really glad that all held up, by the way. Some of our best work.
So then, every time you would contact them, they had one basic principle above all others.
To say nothing of any substance or use whatsoever.
Yeah. Well, and a corollary is admit no vulnerability of any kind. Like acknowledge
everything's
nothing.
Fine.
I mean, and not even like not even like, hey, you're right, but let's, we're not going to talk about that on the record. We're working on it, that sort of thing.
Well, that's true. I do want to amend it a little bit. It's not so much that they wouldn't admit vulnerability. It's more that they jammed words together in such a way that carry no meaning as a whole.
Yeah.
And so it was, like a Mad Libs of public affairs jargon that would just be produced to you. So it's true. While it's true that they admitted no vulnerability, they also simply conveyed no meaning whatsoever.
Right. So it got to the point where even Lisa Halverstadt goes and talks to a signature gatherer himself.
Yeah.
Who says to her very cogently, an analysis, lays out an analysis of where they've gone wrong. Like that a lot of the pros left town. There's a lot of demand for their services right at this moment. There's low unemployment, so it's not like people are flocking to this sort of job. And in this guy, this was his first gig. He's like, and here I am trying to pull it together, right?
Yeah.
And then we hear about this firm, Infield Strategies. Tommy Knepper ran Carl DeMaio's campaign for Congress as the campaign manager, and he has a firm that does door-to-door outreach for campaigns, right?
Typically like a get out the vote or canvassing operation.
Right. And I hear that he's been brought in, which is bananas, because the idea of collecting signatures door to door, I mean, these kind of firms charge like $4 just to go to a door. You know what I mean? So like to add that to the signature gathering price, and you're talking about that's like the premium signature gathering.
Again, I know that this is probably obvious. I want to underline this. The strategy to save money for signatures had led them to paying people a premium to go door to door at the last minute. This was a bad money-saving strategy.
Yeah, and okay.
in that it cost a lot of money.
Yeah, in that to save money, they spent way more of it.
Far more.
Yeah.
What a shit show.
Okay. The campaign, the Admit No Vulnerability campaign and Jam Words Together.
Yeah, more the second part, frankly.
The Jam Words Together campaign now tells us this. That just weeks before the campaign was set to submit signatures, campaign officials uncovered what appears to be, they're always the heroes here. They uncovered what appears to be a fraud.
Clearly brought in some detectives to get to the bottom of this matter.
A fraud perpetrated by Arno Consultants. This was the firm hired to get these signatures. Now, remember, Arno had done the signature gathering for Soccer City. These weren't like, they've achieved this sort of task before. And so campaign officials found information suggesting the firm fabricated signature reports for months. Now, why is this important? This is important because around this time that they're bringing in these special firms to go door to door, and that they're starting to raise the red flag that this is a shit show and we need to get signatures bad. They're asking people to hand out June 23rd, the chamber and the downtown partnership ask all these people who have already donated like $100,000.
Excuse me, Mr. White Shoes lawyer, will you take this clipboard and go hang out in the lobby of your very expensive Class A office space building to ask the people who work there, who may or may not live in San Diego at all, to sign signatures?
A table of Girl Scout cookies.
So
what a shit show.
So they ask all these people. They're asking all these people for money too. And so they're telling everybody that it's on track. They just need a lot more money. And so various reasons we just want to make sure there's enough. We just want to make sure there's the most signatures ever.
The most signatures ever so that there's no question.
Right. They push the deadline out to the point where there cannot be anything, there cannot be any problem. There's no room for any problem.
They acknowledge this at the time, that they have made this decision to keep collecting so that there are more signatures, knowing that the flip side of this is there is not enough time built in to go back and get more if you need to.
Yeah, I think they said, literally, this is our one shot.
Yeah. Again, as we discussed on this show, it has happened before that people have turned in their signatures. There was a slight problem and they had to go get more. Corey Briggs' famous Measure D, that happened too. But there was enough time to fix the problem.
Right. So the campaign continues in its release about what happened. The campaign reached out to every corner of the community to recover from the damage, engaging hundreds of community volunteers, workers, and businesses, small and large. Quote, however, these Herculean efforts...
That is...
I want you guys to know that just for the last 2 days, from Scott's office has come Herculean efforts, followed by crying.
Yeah, there's been a lot of emoting. I've never just watched a drama.
It is in fact directly from a Greek tragedy to concoct this level of shit show and then compare yourself to Hercules.
What a shit show.
These Herculean efforts were not enough to recover from damage inflicted by Arno, the signature gathering firm. Okay.
I frankly, the comparison is Sisyphus. This is a Sisyphusian effort. Wow. Not Herculean at all.
That liberal arts education is coming in handy. Very well done.
Thank you.
Okay, so then... remember, there's one thing to understand throughout this period of time, okay? And that is that there was an escape hatch. There was an out.
Right.
That they could, at any moment, have turned to the city council and said, let's stop the bleeding. Let's stop asking for money. Let's stop paying all these people, all these dollars.
We're waving the flag.
Let's go to the city council and have them put a similar measure on the ballot. They can go through hearings. They might tweak it a little bit, but we'll all be in the room and people could maybe offer other things for the measure and then get it on the ballot in the normal way. It'll require 2/3 vote. We've already said that's going to be no problem, 2/3 vote. But that's the key, is that going through the city council would have eliminated that option that they'd been living with for almost a year, that they could get this on the ballot and pass it with just a 51% vote. This going through the city council would require a 2/3 vote, definitely.
Yeah, and now while leading up to that possibility, as of yesterday, we thought that would be the outcome, that the city council would put this on the ballot and we'd now be looking at a 2/3 measure. And while that felt like something of a disaster because they had obviously been aiming for this 50%
and
plus
they'd spent like $1 million
on it, it's worth remembering that they actually, had that have gone forward, they would have been in a better position than they were aiming to be just a year ago, when they were trying to push forward a 2/3 requirement for a special election, which would have theoretically been a less advantageous electorate. So they would have, in this case, I think it is right to view it as a long shot at 2/3 regardless. But as far as disasters go, if your disaster looks actually a little bit better than your preferred path 1 year ago, maybe it wouldn't have been the world's worst outcome.
That's well said.
Thank you.
So in early July, late June, they make more decisions along the lines of, well, we're not going to do that.
Yeah.
Because that would book our losses, basically. This $1 million that we've put into this, that would say, that's done. We lit that on fire. Sorry.
Yeah.
And we're just going to go this route. So they stick with it. Remember the crowing when they turned in the signature gatherers?
Yeah, it was like the culmination of all the word salad releases.
Yeah.
It was a word salad press conference.
Triumphant, we've achieved this. All the naysayers be gone. Nothing about fraud, by the way. Nothing about the fraud that they discovered.
Can you believe we've done this despite being the victims of a vicious fraud campaign?
Nothing about that. Triumphant.
Yeah.
It's just amazing. So they're amazing. And then we wait. We wait and we wait. And this week we say...
Would it be fair to say that as we waited, it became clearer and clearer that there was a problem again?
Well, can we add the stakes got even higher?
Yeah.
Because in the meantime, the city makes a deal with the people who have the lease to the land behind the convention center that's required to expand the convention center. And they make a deal. They say, we'll give you $5.3 million now and a total of $33 million if this measure passes. So $5.3 million is on the way to those guys and $33 million if this measure passes. So the stakes on this issue suddenly go through the roof.
So and there's something else that happened during this time period that, we've been kind of having a laugh about this today. Would you laugh to keep yourself from crying? But this is actually the real tragedy of the situation. The other thing that happened during this time period is they bullied 2 other measures off the ballot.
Yes.
One pushed by the San Diego Housing Federation, which was specifically to create bonded capacity to pay for affordable housing that would be aimed at homeless people. The other pushed by Councilman David Alvarez that would have also used TOT revenue to pay for homelessness for the housing.
And it would have increased the hotel room tax by 1%.
By 1%. And so even if you don't like the structure or layout of those 2 measures, the important point is they chose this as the one and only path, bullied other alternatives out as would-be competition, and said we can't have that level of competition on the ballot. And the flame out has now guaranteed that what voters get to decide is nothing.
And I think that that's really important to point out because in, excoriating the city council for eventually not putting this on the ballot, the mayor specifically blamed them for there being no solutions to homelessness. He didn't, say, oh, the poor convention center, we're so sad for the convention center. Yeah. He said, homelessness, you have failed on homelessness.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're waiting for the signature gathering count to come.
Which, that's another
and then
thing.
Finally we say
we're back into the timeline.
Yeah,
okay.
We're waiting for that, and then the Wednesday, we know it's going to come this week. Finally, Wednesday, everybody looks at their phone and discovers that the city clerk has taken in the information from the registrar of voters and discovered that they have not gotten enough signatures to guarantee a spot on the ballot. They might have enough to qualify eventually, but they'd have to go through each signature to verify that. And again, remember, they left no room for this to happen. This is the last week that you can put stuff on the ballot. Thus, City Hall was thrown into chaos.
That's accurate. Every person that you called for the last 2 days just answered with a sigh.
Yeah. It was a dark. I talked to somebody and I was like, what this happened? And I remember him just pausing for a while. And I was like, oh, did I lose you? And he's like, no, I'm just trying to take this in and figure out. And I think, so everybody's looking at their phones. Then we're all like, what are they going to do? Because remember, they still have that escape hatch. They're like, well, so the mayor finally releases plan, says, I'm not going to wait. There is a plan where this could get on the ballot in 2020, but that's unreasonable. Yeah. We got to do this now. I'm asking the city council to put it on the ballot themselves. This escape hatch that was available this entire time, they want to get into it right now. Now, when a measure is a citizens initiative, it's by default, it's created in a private setting by the citizens who come up with it. And in this case, and I think secret is fair. It's just they were meeting. They didn't let us into their meetings.
Yeah, I mean, they didn't broadcast the meetings.
Right.
They didn't take place in Balboa Park, nor did they have some sort of FM station that would broadcast them.
Right.
So
they were.
And when you asked about them, they declined to tell you any details.
Yes, they were actually quite gruff about the whole thing.
Right. Labor unions and the visitor industry and the mayor's allies made a deal in this setting for what this measure would be. And so when that sort of thing, that's fine as a citizens initiative, people can vote it up or down.
Yeah, I mean, so there's been a lot of negative rhetoric around that, calling it cooked up by special interests and secret. You don't even have to believe it's corrupt. It's just, as you say,
that's how it works.
That's how it works. A citizens initiative is created by private people in a closed situation.
And so when it becomes a city initiative, the city has a policy saying well, you need to have this many hearings and people need to have a say in it. They need to listen. And then they might have something to offer. I don't know. It's a crazy idea. But then, so that comes over and that becomes an immediate concern. Now, a lot of people brush it off. Congressman Scott Peters, I've spoken with him. He's like, look, you can't let process like that get in the way of what we've all agreed needs to get done. We needed to get this on the ballot. And I think that's true to a point. But regardless, it provided something to stand on if you wanted to reject this thing. Mm-hmm. And then the emergency session is called. They meet. And that's when Tom Lemon comes up and he says,
what a shit show.
And then he starts to make the case for it. And so when we started seeing him and other labor leaders speak for it.
Murtaza Baksamusa spoke for it.
Well, he ceded his time.
Oh, that's right.
But
right. Keith Maddox who runs the Labor Council. And so I was in council chambers yesterday, and I'm looking, and I saw Carol Kim, who works for Building Trades, giving a hug to Chris Michelle. Gretchen Newsom is sitting there talking to some of the people associated with the business side of this. By all appearances, the coalition was still stitched together.
Right.
There was no evident break.
Right.
And I mean, they're giving public comment. They're stating, we want you to pass this thing.
Right. The stage. I mean, labor was all in. It seemed like.
Yeah. It seemed to me, okay, well, this is going to pass.
Yeah. So a lot of us are looking like, oh, well, the drama, and then gets to Barbara Bree, Democrat city councilwoman from La Jolla. She says, I'm against this. I'm a no.
Yeah. A firm no. There was no ambiguity about her statement.
Right. Then it goes to Georgette Gomez. No. David Alvarez. No. Then there's one last vote.
So there's one last vote. And it's Myrtle Cole. She has been in this position before. She is often the swing vote who ends up siding with Republicans against her Democratic allies.
And crucially,
though not recently, but it has been the case in the past.
And crucially, Chris Ward is somewhere on the other side of the earth. I don't know where he is exactly.
Tahiti, right?
I don't know. It's something like that.
Yeah, okay.
And is unable
to... Did I make that up in my head? Because that had been locked in as a fact.
I think I kept saying that as a placeholder for where he might be.
Okay.
I hope that he's got an umbrella drink in his hand right now.
So he is zinc on his nose. That's what I...
So Mark Kersey, the councilman, is in Ohio. He calls in.
Hilliard, Ohio.
Ohio.
Suburb north of Columbus.
I heard about it.
All right.
And then and then Chris Keatts is brought in from paternity leave. His wife just had a baby. They're dealing with those first chaotic few weeks.
He was gone for a week and a half.
Yeah. And he's just been the baby's a week old, and they're like, you got to come in.
Could you imagine anything? Those first 2 weeks are magical. Could you imagine any shift from that
To a city council hearing?
That city council hearing? Oh, poor guy.
So they bring him in, but Ward can't be reached. This is on the other side of the earth. And this is his district, this convention center, and he's been supportive of it. He almost went last year to support the special election. That was the one they all identified, like he might be able to come over. So this is his thing, and he's not there. Mm-hmm. So they just need one more vote against this to kill this. Goes to Cole. Now let's talk about Cole for a second.
Yes.
Do you mind?
I don't.
Yeah, Cole, at the moment that this was all riding on her, if you're familiar with her current political predicament, there was a lot riding on this decision.
Sure.
Potentially. Up in there. In one way or another.
Right. Okay, so here is what puzzles me.
Yeah.
Myrtle Cole is in nothing short of the fight for her political career, right?
Yes. During the June primary election, she's running for re-election. She's the council president. She is, by title, the second most powerful figure in the city. This should be a cakewalk for her. 61% of voters in her district voted for someone besides her.
Was it that many?
Yeah, she got 39%.
Wow. So she is very openly depending on labor unions to help her get through this runoff, right?
She told me we didn't run a re-election campaign in the primary. We're ready for this, and then said, I just had a meeting with labor to figure out how we're going to do this.
So let me ask you this.
Yeah.
If labor tells her, we really want this at this moment in your political career.
Which we don't have to guess that they did. It happened at the microphone in front of her.
Right. Then I would think that would carry some weight. And when you have the labor guy saying, this is a shit show.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if their heart was in it. And I know I can't speculate on motivations, but I have a feeling that if labor really wanted one more vote for this, they might have been able to find it.
Yeah, well, so applying pressure is not a binary decision.
Right.
Right. There is a question of how much pressure they placed on somebody. Sometimes you tell people, you will do this, or our support will walk.
There will be consequence. And they've done that to her in the past.
Or sometimes you say, this is what we want you to do, but vote your conscience, vote your district, or whatever, right?
You'd also think that if that were the case, that there are other people on the council that they could also pressure. We saw with the vacation rental vote, David Alvarez felt very conflicted when he was puzzled or pressured by labor. And so, he voted against this as well.
Councilwoman Barbara Bree is no secret to anyone pursuing a potential mayoral run in 2020. Labor would presumably have some interest in that discussion. There's everybody has something, some point on which labor could apply pressure if they chose to.
Whatever happened, she starts talking, and when I hear her say the way that Barbara Bree said, I support the convention center, but. And when I heard that, the blood rushed from my face. And then she said, but I'm a no vote on this. And I think a squeal. I don't like the word squeal because it sounds like happy. It was just this like, ah! Like I was just stunned. I've watched a lot of these things. I've gotten amped up for them. But right then, the moment was especially extraordinary that this thing had gotten killed.
Yeah.
And it was dead.
Yeah.
That was an interesting place to be yesterday.
It was dead.
Oh man, walking around in council chambers in that lobby afterwards was a lot of zombies.
It's like, we don't deal with a lot of breaking news situations, but in that moment, like Scott is maybe on the floor of his office at one point. Lisa was a blur sprinting to the door to get to council chambers. She left a cloud of dust in her wake.
Yeah.
Her feet were like wheels before she could get going. And it was like,
this was just one of those rare moments where
what a shit show.
What a shit show.
Yeah, and like I laugh. That's a default. Like that's an instinctual reaction. It's like I've been talking about this. My kids, they'll sometimes laugh when something bad has happened, like I've hurt myself or something. Not because it comically hurt myself, but because they don't know how to react otherwise. They just laugh, and it's like that's what I've been feeling. It's like it's just a shock. I've never seen this spectacular of a failure in politics, and it came together like this. And then the sort of fierce finger pointing that came afterward. I mean, this was a deeply humiliating public political failure that had just climaxed and been resolved that way.
Yeah, and so it is a deeply humiliating public failure for everyone associated with it. Labor, business groups, the hotel industry, Mayor Faulconer, the people who he hired and put in place, powerful lobbyists, lots of people. But I do think that because it's so personally focused, undershoots the main important message here, which is the city decided, forget about the $1 million. So you don't care about the $1 million of hotel or labor money that was wasted on this. The political capital, there was a decision made that this was the priority above all else.
Yes.
And it is not a hypothetical to say that other priorities were not just drained of attention, were actually suffocated under the weight of this. And then for this to die, it means not only did the top priority was it not achieved, but it forced everything out of the conversation. We have spent all of our time focused on this, and now we get nothing. And for
to a certain extent, that has been the case for a decade. And that the shit of this is that now that this is put to 2020, there will be a plausible reason to continue to make this not just the top priority, but frankly, the only priority in City Hall, and as it has been for a very, very long time.
And to the extent that there were any other priorities over the last decade, it was pension reform, which also isn't going well.
Which brings us to, all right, the game's over. We're talking about it. We're taking in what it all means. And this is an extraordinary period of chaos at City Hall. Last year, I wrote a story about how he had switched chiefs of staff after his most rocky period, the Mayor Faulconer's most rocky period in office. Well, I put "yet" in the headline, and I'm glad I did, because this is far worse. Yes. And I think we're at a moment where there was a thing that blew up on Twitter and others' face where the mayor's staff and he were like fiercely finger pointing. Like this was the city council chose not to house people, chose not to shelter people.
They say they care about homelessness, and clearly they do not.
Because of petty political garbage and whatever excuses they made. I mean, he went fierce at them.
Yeah.
His staff followed the lead. There was nasty backs and forth. Yeah. It was bad.
Right.
And I just sat back and I just want to say something about leadership real quick. One thing I learned like a decade ago, or not, I don't know. I remember one of our board members said, the thing you have to remember about executive leadership is that it all is about outcomes. There's, you don't want to break the law or do something unethical to get to an outcome. But the only thing that matters in evaluating whether an executive's performed well or not is outcomes. Did the outcome work? Did you have good outcomes? Were they quality? Is it what you wanted? Is it what you promised? How did it manage with your expectations? And that's it. You can, and if you see an executive making a ton of excuses, maybe really good excuses, this happened and this happened, this set me back and then this set me back, that might help you understand why they failed, but it doesn't mean that they were a good executive, because that's the only thing that matters. Mm-hmm. And I think that's an important moment right here. The outcomes are not good. It's a rough time. And we can say, like, you know, the homelessness issue. I think a year ago, the homelessness issue peaks up again. These guys were brought in to like get stuff done on this front too, and people died, and it was bad. And I think there's been a tremendous amount of work over the last year, but I think the big lesson is that should have happened for a long time.
I want to add a caveat to the outcomes evaluation in that, you know, you said maybe sometimes there are good excuses. I don't think there were any here. We didn't have a massive earthquake. There was no massive thing that was outside the mayor's control that he can blame this on. So he chose to blame the city council, and his finger pointing, like, everything that led up to this was a result of politicking and political calculation, which is his job.
Yeah, exactly.
And so, you know, even to the extent that there sometimes are excuses that foul up an outcome, I don't think that there are any here. There wasn't anything extraordinary that happened that was outside of his control.
Yeah, I mean, said another way, this is a discussion about getting the city council to place a ballot measure for approval among voters. It is a political act.
Right.
You do not absolve yourself by saying this is the result of politics. Yes, it is the result of politics. It exists in the realm of politics. All of it, if it had succeeded, it would have been by virtue of politics. This is what is happening right now.
And you're a politician.
You are a politician.
Your job is to do the politics right.
Win politically.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think we're at a moment where, and this should reflect on the council as well. I mean, they're
that's
Yes.
the level of blame available is both a mile wide and a mile deep.
And it's what kind of gets me upset about Tom Lemon saying, "What a shit show."
Yeah.
You led this.
Yeah.
You were an equal parts leader of this shit show. And I think he sort of betrayed, I think, something about what he's really thinking when he othered it like that. When he got up there and said, "What a shit show," as though it wasn't his shit show.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of that going around. Like, this was the mayor.
Now, he did cop to it on Twitter when you said labor, yeah, and he said, "You're right, I'll own that."
Yeah, but I think there was an immediate effort to other it from that. But that's theirs too. This is theirs too.
Yes.
Yeah, and, you know, to the extent that the mayor blamed the council for not getting anything done on homelessness through this measure, the Democratic majority council had a chance to put through David Alvarez's measure, which would have presumably done more for homelessness, and they could have done that. And so that's not quite the blame that Kevin Faulconer was, you know, trying to attribute, but I do think that they did have a chance to do something different about homelessness, and they didn't.
That is a wonderful point. Yes, to say, well, this coalition bullied these other measures off the ballot is to pretend that the Democratic majority on the council doesn't have agency to pursue its own measure in spite of the pressure that is on them, if that's what they wanted. If you want a backup plan, if you don't want to put all your eggs in this basket, build a plan. If you don't like the one proposed by David Alvarez, build a different plan. If you like the Housing Federation plan so much, stand by them. The Housing Federation's been part of your coalition for years. So, yeah. Yes, the mayor-led coalition forced this as the solution, and this failed, and for that he deserves a lot of blame. But the Democrats on the council should own their own role in an empty ballot, while other cities are putting up their own homelessness measures, with which they will be able to compete for matching state funds that we will not be able to compete for.
It's a really. There's been a lot of dramas in summers in San Diego politics. Obviously, the biggest one was when Mayor Bob Filner was forced out of office. But there's been these sorts of things over. I remember a ballot measure by Carl DeMaio flaming out after it didn't get enough signatures, and that transitioned to a discussion about a sales tax increase that bombed at the ballot.
Last year, the push for a special election for this and the Soccer City.
And then there was the year that the mayor resigned, and there was a special election in 2005, Donna Fry versus Jerry Sanders. This summers have been dramatic, but I am looking at a city that is as low as far as I can tell, as far as leadership and coherent direction that I've ever seen. There was a low point where they couldn't get bonds. There was a low point where finances were so bad there were people losing their jobs. But this is a low point that's so obviously self-imposed and pretends so much chaos that something is off and dark and sad.
Said another way, the last 5 years have been a period of abundance.
Yes.
There's persistent economic expansion happening in this region. The unemployment rate is at an all-time low. And during that time, the time when you're able, you should be freed up to have to make decisions to solve problems proactively, because instead of your budget shrinking and you're making tough decisions, your budget's expanding, and you should be, that hasn't always been the case, but as a whole, you have the capacity to solve problems proactively. And what we've done during that time is watch homelessness get worse, lose the Chargers, come to nothing resembling a solution in Mission Valley, waste time and money and political capital on
public health crisis in which people lost their lives.
Yeah, there's major transportation funding problems at Sandag. MTS is talking about coming to some sort of solution. We have failed to use this period of economic growth to solve things. And there will be a recession at some point, which means then you start getting into the discussion of cutting services and of making decisions that nobody wants.
Otherwise, things are looking up.
Sure.
All right. When we come back, we're going to do our hero and goat of the week.
This Voice of San Diego podcast is brought to you by Manalatus Nelson Murphy, Advertising and Public Relations. As a nonprofit news organization, we depend on our members, foundations, and sponsors like M&M to provide funding to support the investigative journalism you expect from Voice of San Diego. We are very grateful for all of our supporters, and we will recognize them during the show. M&M is run by Tony Manalatus, Bob Nelson, and Kelly Murphy Lamkin, who bring a vast network and decades of experience to developers, public agencies, campaigns, and others. M&M bridges the gap between clients and the people whose influence matters most. M&M develops successful strategies and implements cost-effective tactics to help clients achieve their goals. The firm specializes in public affairs PR and advertising, with an emphasis on media relations, crisis communications, community engagement, and cross-platform marketing. Our reporters at Voice of San Diego have heard from Tony and Bob a lot over the years. Tony, Bob, and Kelly are supporters of Voice of San Diego. Learn more about their firm at mnmadpr.com. And if you like Voice of San Diego's work and want to become a sponsor too, contact us at development@voiceofsandiego.org.
We are back. Our hero of the week. All right, so we wanted to give this to Liz Malin. She is the city clerk for the city of San Diego. I remember her when she was number 2 at the city clerk's office, and has done a tremendous job as city clerk. I think there's no specific reason. Obviously, she was the one that broke the news about them not getting enough signatures to immediately qualify for the ballot. That's not a heroic move. But I think what made me just appreciate her is that, like, it's always straight. She's available. She'll explain anything to you, anything to anybody. And it's nice to have a pillar in city government that's that important, that's that key to all the other things working. And just know that you can have radical trust in that person.
Yeah, that will be taken care of there. it would, there are no shenanigans, no. We talk about whether the procedural issues that preceded yesterday's vote were not at the clerk level. The clerk never plays procedural games. She's always available to journalists, to city council members speak highly of her as well. The folks like that sue the city, that sort of thing, always get what they need too. She's a professional.
Our GOAT of the week.
You lose. Good day, sir.
The San Diego Ethics Commission fined Phil Rath, board chair of Civic San Diego, $11,000 for what the commission's chair described as egregious violations that strike at the cornerstone of the city's ethics laws. Okay, so here's what happened. Rath joined Civic's board in the summer of 2015. That was a few months after he had stopped lobbying the county on behalf of Affirmed Housing. It's a nonprofit developer. The firm had paid him $20,000 at the end of 2014 for that work. So when he took his seat on the Civic's board, he should have included that on his financial disclosures when he joined the agency, but he did not. Then a few months later, in August of 2015, the firm paid him $100,000 as a deferred payment for that county work. And 5 months later, when he had to file another annual disclosure for all of his significant economic interests, he again did not mention that he had received $100,000 from Affirmed Housing. And then a few months after that, in June of 2016, Civic San Diego began selecting the winning bid for a project to develop 8 acres of city-owned land in southeastern San Diego that included nearly $6 million in city affordable housing funds. Affirmed Housing was one of the bidders, which means that Rath should have recused himself from 2 separate votes on that project selection. One was at the committee and one was at the full board. Not only did Rath not recuse himself, he voted for Affirm's bid and spoke glowingly about how they were obviously the best choice. Affirmed won the bid, and when the project came to the city council for final approval in November 2017, only then did Rath's conflict of interest begin to come to light, thanks to a legal threat from Corey Briggs and the organization he represents, San Diegans for Open Government. Speaking to me at the time, Rath dismissed the idea that he had an ongoing financial relationship with the firm. He did not mention at that point that he had been paid $100,000 by the company after he joined Civic's board and within 12 months of his taking 2 votes in favor of their bid.
Andy.
Yeah.
I think you're betraying your class here.
Yeah.
And not realizing, because $100,000 is just not something that everybody would make such a big deal about.
Look, journalists have a blinkered view of public affairs because they're so poorly paid. They don't recognize that some of these officials operate on a level where you make a donation here and you make a donation there, but you don't expect anything of it. You just wanna be able to call that guy when you get it. $10,000 to them just flies off their backs. $100,000 payment, that's not something you remember.
Sometimes I leave $100,000 check on the counter. It gets like orange juice stains on it and stuff, and it's just it's not a big deal.
$100,000 here, deferred work. $100,000 there, deferred work. These ethics laws, they require such rigorous bookkeeping. I mean, could you remember every single time we reimbursed you for $10 of gasoline to put in your car because you were going to interview somebody? Come on.
So tough one.
It's just $100,000.
Good job following it. Your story's up on Voice of San Diego. My sort of TikTok about how this whole convention center failure came to be over the last year is also up on the site. Voice of San Diego had a good week at the
Quite
Voice.
a week, yeah.
A lot of good.
At our little blog.
Well, sometimes the news helps.
Sure. And to all of our partners at News Radio 600 Kogo and to Kinsey and everybody that is involved in producing the show, thank you, Kinsey Moreland. Hi, Kinsey.
Hi.
And all of our support, thank you, and we'll see you next week.